Hey, I'm Kev, Mr. Car, and welcome to Power Oversteer. And in today's episode, we are reviewing the 16th round of the 2013 FIA Formula 1 World Championship, the Indian Grand Prix held at the Bulla International Circuit near New Delhi, and it was the third and even perhaps final Indian Grand Prix, but it threw up some history, it threw up some record book facts in its final appearance for now. And again, it was that finger, that team that had dominated the previous two events that again dominated this one. But there are some interesting stories behind, and from a strategy point of view, it's perhaps the best race of the year for that. And even though there wasn't much of it taken, there was much of DRS passes and curves passes, but you know, it was still an interesting race to follow. And to talk about that race, of course, we start with the race recap. So the race recap of the Indian Grand Prix, and at the start, well, let's actually talk a bit about the grid. And on pole was Sebastian Vettel, along with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton behind him in the Mercedes, but they started on soft tyres. In fourth place, Mark Webber was on the prime tyre, so a bit of an interesting strategy from the get-go. Felipe Massa was in fifth, out qualifying Fernando Alonso again in his Ferrari. In sixth was Kimi Raikkonen, and in seventh was Nico Hülkenberg, very consistent in that seventh spot in the last three races from him. In eighth we do see Alonso, the closest challenger to Vettel, and the only guy who could deny Vettel the World Championship at the Indian Grand Prix. We had Sergio Perez in ninth ahead of his teammate Jenson Button. Down the order a bit now, and it was Daniel Ricciardo in 11th, just missing out on Q3 in his Toro Rosso ahead of the two Force Indias at that home race, Paul di Resta and Adrian Sutil, their second home race. In 14th was John-Eric Vergne in his typical spot just behind his teammate, or quite a few places behind his teammate on the grid. Best Williams was Valtteri Bottas in 15th, he was ahead of the Sauber of Esteban Gutierrez, and then it was Roman Grosjean down in 17th. His lows caught out in Q1 by not going onto those soft tyres at the end of the session. Pastor Maldonado was down in 18th in his Williams, and the best of the newer teams was Jules Bianchi ahead of Guido van der Garde, Charles Pic and then Max Chilton. But at the start, well, we saw Vettel defend hard from a fast start, and Lewis Hamilton had the run down the middle, but Vettel pulled across and kept the lead going into turn 1. Hamilton was ahead of Rosberg, and behind that we saw Mark Webber have a clumsy start from 4th. Again, he was a bit slow getting away, and then on that first corner he just clipped, not the inside curve, but that kind of sausage bit on the inside, those orange parts, I don't know what they call them, but yeah, he clouted that into the first corner and went into the side of Kimi Raikkonen, and as he was a bit slow, Alonso behind was on the power, and so it clipped the front left part of his front wing, and then Webber got overtaken by Nico Hülkenberg round the outside into turn 3 before that long back stretch. And then we saw, going into that turn, we saw some more action. We saw Alonso again having some contact with Ricciardo, this time Jenson Button, as Daniel Ricciardo was going down his inside. He had to adjust for the Toro Rosso there, and so he went into the side of Jenson Button's right rear wheel, and so yeah, again he clipped a bit of the front wing. And further back we also saw Guido van der Garde, and again getting caught up in an incident at the beginning of the race here with Max Chilton, this time the other Marussia driver, into turn 1. It seemed to damage his car, and he was out very early on that first lap. Also going into that turn 4 corner, we also saw Felipe Massa. He had a great jump up to 4th, and then he got up to 2nd, getting past both the Mercedes down that back straight. And so it was Vettel leading Massa, and then we had Rosberg, Hamilton, Hülkenberg up to 5th, Raikkonen, Webber, who had dropped down to 7th, Perez, Ricciardo and Alonso. Then on lap 2 we saw Vettel pit from the lead, getting rid of those soft tyres very early. We also saw Alonso pit to also change his front ring as well. And we also saw Guido van der Garde pit at the end of the first lap and retire. We saw De Resta and John Vergne put in at the end of the first laps as well to get off those soft tyres and onto the harder compounds. And so for the first third of the race, it was a mixture of just seeing these prime runners, stay out there, such as Webber in the lead, and then we've seen the soft tyre runners try and get through the pack. We saw Alonso not really that effective. We saw the Vettel and Red Bull had a great car around here and get through the pack quite easily. So around third distance, you had Webber leading from Vettel, and then Perez, Ricciardo, and Sutil staying out on those prime tyres behind them. Then we saw the other pitters, Massa, Rosberg, and Hamilton ahead of Vitaly Bottas, and he was trying to stay out there ahead of Nico Hulkenberg. Now on lap 22, as I said, Alonso was struggling to get past the cars ahead of him, such as Esteban Gutierrez. The Mexican was running quite well in 7th place until he got a drive-through penalty for jumping the start. He didn't really have a great jump, he just rolled forward a bit and put on the brakes, but that was enough to trigger the sensors and classify as a jump start. He came in for his penalty and came out actually in front of Alonso after serving that penalty, and so Alonso finally made his way past Gutierrez out of turn 4, using a bit of curves, and Gutierrez just giving him a car's whip, a pure car's whip. It was just enough for Alonso to sneak past him and up to 13th place. And then it was more batty. It was more about the strategy here. You didn't see too many passes, at least up front, and we saw Mark Webber really stay out there until lap 33 when he pits for the soft tyres, and he came out behind Daniel Ricciardo in his Toro Rosso, who is still out there on his prime tyres ahead of Perez and Sutil as well. And Sutil went really long into the race on his prime tyres. Got Ricciardo a pit at the end of that lap. Then we saw some more pit stops, but there was trouble up front, not for Vettel but for Webber, and he had kind of gearbox issues, but it turned out being alternator failure on his car, and so he had to retire on lap 39. This was after Charles Picker retired on lap 35 in his KTM to signal the end of the race for KTM, a miserable race for them. But yeah, Webber retired from second spot after he had been on the softs for about 5 laps and then went back onto the prime tyres. And so behind Vettel we now have Raikkonen about 25 seconds behind Vettel, so Vettel already had a pit stop in hand with 2/3 of the race done. Sutil was still going out there in 3rd with Rosberg 4th, Grosjean in 5th on his one stopper, Massa in 6th, Hamilton 7th, Perez 8th, Hulkenberg 9th, and then De Resta round out the top 10. So great race for De Resta and Force Ninja at this moment. And then we saw that Raikkonen was actually doing a one stopper as well, like his teammate, but he did it the other way round. He started on the soft tyres and then went onto the medium tyres. Grosjean started on the mediums and then went onto the softs. Actually no, he went on the softs then the mediums. No, Raikkonen did it the other way round. I'm confusing myself. But yeah, Raikkonen was really struggling with his tyres around lap 52, and he had Rosberg right behind him. We also saw Sutil pit between this gap around lap 44, I think it was, or 43. He pitted onto the soft tyres, and Rosberg was all over the back of Raikkonen, and he finally DRS'd him down the back straight for second. We also heard Vettel had to stop using his drinks bottles. Red Bull was trying to manage the kind of electronics in the car. They won't, they're trying to make sure that Vettel won't have an alternator failure like Webber. So on that 54, Vettel was leading by 27.144 seconds, and he was informed that drivers are making pit stops for soft tyres. We're not thinking about that. We're just managing our problems at the front ahead of Rosberg. And Raikkonen was getting caught by seconds per lap by his teammate Roman Grosjean. We had Massa just behind in 5th with Hamilton and Perez in tow. They were very close behind him. The rest was up to 8th as Hulkenberg had to pit in his Sauber. He pitted once and he came back in again to retire. That's because he had brake problems on the car. It was kind of pulling to a side when he was braking, so he had to retire on safety grounds. You had Sutil behind that with a little bit of a train behind him, including Daniel Ricciardo, Fernando Alonso, who was just struggling in the middle there. And there was also Gutierrez there before he pitted late in the race for softs. Maldonado was behind that, then Button, and then John Vergne. But on that 56, Grosjean finally caught up to Raikkonen and tried to take him round the outside into turn 4. Unfortunately, the Finn wasn't that cooperative with his teammate and kind of forced him off the road. Grosjean rejoined in front, but he learned from Hungary. He had to give back the place to Raikkonen, and Grosjean was angry on the radio, and so were the team. Tom Raikkonen pulled out the bloody way. I'm being kind now with the words there, but yeah, Raikkonen did at the end of the next lap going on to the front straight, but unfortunately Massa was right behind Grosjean, and so he took advantage of that and DRS'd him down that front straight as well, and Raikkonen would pit finally on lap 59, but he still had some more cars to battle on lap 58. That included Lewis Hamilton and his train, and the Massa train. So Hamilton, well, not the Massa train, but the Hamilton train now with Sergio Perez in tow. So Hamilton tried to dummy Raikkonen into turn 1, didn't quite get the move done. Then Perez tried to dummy Hamilton into turn 3, didn't quite get it done in that hairpin. But down that back straight we saw Hamilton get DRS and then Perez DRS both of them. Great placement with the car from Perez to take advantage of Hamilton getting kind of stuck behind Raikkonen and DRS them both and get up to 5th place. But it was business as usual at the front, and it was a 4th world title for Sebastian Vettel with his 3rd win in India on the trot, the only winner of the Indian Grand Prix, ahead of Nico Rosberg and Roman Grosjean on that one-stopper from 17th on the grid, finishing on the podium, just ahead of Felipe Massa. Sergio Perez with equal McLaren's best result so far this season from the 5th place that Jenson Button got in China, with his own 5th place here in Indian Grand Prix, just ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Kimi Raikkonen was 7th, Paul di Resta 8th, Adrian Sutil 9th, and Daniel Ricciardo 10th. So good double points finish for Force India at the 2nd home race. Fernando Alonso just outside the points in his Ferrari in 11th. Pastor Maldonado in 12th, just behind Alonso in the end, and only 2.7 seconds off a point in that Williams. John Vergne was lapped in 13th, with Jenson Button 14th, Esteban Gutierrez 15th, Valtteri Bottas 16th. Max Chilton, best of the newer teams, ahead of his teammate Jules Bianchi, just ahead of his teammate in the end. And then the retirements: Nico Hulkenberg on lap 54, Mark Webber on lap 39, Charles Pic on lap 35, and Guido van der Garde on the 1st lap. So that's your race recap of the Indian Grand Prix. Let's go into the winners and losers now. So the winners and losers of the Indian Grand Prix, and as you probably know in Power, so we go from back to front. So let's start with Caterham. 2 retirements on lap 35 and on the 1st lap. Van der Garde just got into contact with Chilton, seeing from the damage, had to retire. Well, I think Charles Pitt just had electronic issues or something, he just had to retire as well in his case. So very poor weekend for Caterham, and in qualifying they got outdone by Jules Bianchi as well, and so that was a very rare sight to see Marussia really on terms with Caterham this weekend. And so yeah, it was not the weekend that Caterham wanted, but it was a weekend that maybe Russia did want, with Max Chilton 17th and Jules Bianchi 18th. And Bianchi actually was ahead of Chilton at the start, but then dropped behind him after having to stop on the first pit stop with the front jacks, and so yeah, it kind of delayed him in the pits. Chilton jumped in and stayed ahead of Bianchi till the end, but Bianchi got really close in those last 5 laps, just couldn't quite make the move on his teammate. It seemed maybe it's because of the blue flag situation, having to pull over, and he just regained in that time. But yeah, great drive from Chilton again to beat his teammate again, and Chilton, he's ending the season on quite a high note, and I'm sure of course he's fighting for his place in Formula 1 at the moment, and his performances are really going to help with that at the moment. And Bianchi, just kind of dropped off from the beginning of the year, and that we don't really know if that's just Chilton upping his level, it seems to be, or Bianchi just dropping his level, or just staying on the same level and Chilton getting onto his. But it's Bianchi, just a solid run from him, but yeah, getting a bit outdone by Chilton again, which is surprising to see this season. But yeah, good race from Chilton. The Williams, Bottas in 16th, just struggled again, the Williams, and Bottas did quite a good okay job in 15th, and saying that is strange, isn't it? A Williams did okay for 15th, but did okay job in qualifying, and Maldonado did the better job in the race, and in the end just missed out on a point, as I said, 2.7 seconds. So there might be a missed opportunity for Williams to get a point there with the Sutil train. He was catching up to that at the end of the race. So yeah, that's a shame for Williams, just not being able to nick that point at the end. But yeah, it's encouraging for them that they were just so close to it. So You never know if the race is a bit frantic, or if it's got loads of strategies like this race, where we're not really sure which is the best one. Williams might be challenging for a point there. That's encouraging in the last 3 races of the season. Then we have Toro Rosso and John Vernon in 13th, just nowhere again in the race. That's been his pattern for this last part of the season. If I look at his recent results, basically, his best finish has been 12th in Japan, in Belgium, in Hungary, but apart from that, he's not done better than that. He's had a few retirements, so Vern's just nowhere in the race with his pace compared to his teammate. Ricciardo got another point in that race, did a very good job holding off Alonso as well, and he withstand the pressure of Alonso, who's going for that title, trying to keep that title hopes alive, and just couldn't get it going in the Ferrari. But yeah, very good job from Ricciardo again. Didn't quite get in the Q3 in qualifying, just got pipped there, so that'd be disappointing for Toro Rosso. But the pace is definitely there again to get some solid points. And after a run where he had to retire in Korea, he retired in Singapore by going into the wall midway through the race, and in Japan, Toro Rosso weren't going to nowhere near the point. So, well, Ricciardo was until he got that drive-through penalty, but it was stop and go if he's going to get into the points. So yeah, Ricciardo doing another solid job, and he's really stepped up, especially since he's been announced in that Red Bull seat. He really has stepped up his performance, it seems. And so we also talk about Sauber, and Sauber, they're going to be disappointed with this race, of course. Esteban Gutierrez getting that drive-through penalty for that jump start, and that really kind of ruined his race, as he's doing a great job at the beginning on his primes. He's running in the top 10, but yeah, he just dropped back, and he never seemed to recover his race after that. While Hulkenberg was getting some points, he's in 8th place in that spot that De Resta finally got, and it's a shame that just near the end of the race, getting those brake problems, having to retire the car. So we've been another points finish for the Hulk, and it's the first time Sauber haven't scored points since the Belgian Grand Prix. So ends their good run of 4 races on the trot, and Hulkenberg's good run of 4 point scores on the trot. And so yeah, he's in a good battle in 10th in the Drivers' Championship, and Sauber, of course, battling for that 6th spot in the Constructors with Force India. So disappointing for them that they've dropped points to Force India for the first time in a long time as well. So yeah, a very disappointing weekend for Sauber. Let's actually talk about Force India. 8th and 9th, getting double points finishes after qualifying in 12th or 13th on the grid. And that's probably the best they can do on the grid. They really are battling to get into that Q3 slot, along with Toro Rosso and Sauber, and even McLaren as well. But McLaren were a bit of a step up this weekend compared to the usual midfield runners. And so yeah, Force India, great strategy in that race. I'm not sure if it worked out for Sutil, because he finished 9th. He was a couple of seconds behind De Resta, but I think maybe just because he had the clear air, it worked out well from that strategy. But it's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, I think it did just work out, that strategy for Sutil, that one stop, going very long in those primes. So I think it's over 40 laps, and then ending the race on those softs. So really a race of management for Sutil. And the rest, great 8th place, a bit more aggressive strategy for him, and yeah, he's grabbed some points which he hasn't done since the British Grand Prix, would believe in, with a 9th spot there. So it's been about 8 races for De Resta since he's got a point, or a couple of points. So yeah, it's very timely for De Resta as well. Nikonot's fighting for his Formula 1 career, and Force India, I know they're going to leave their driver announcement to the very end of the season, maybe even after Brazil, because they're really looking at what Lotus are doing, and then maybe look at what Sauber are doing as well before they will announce. So yeah, very timely result for De Resta and for Sutil as well, in the same boat as De Resta, it seems. And De Resta jumping ahead of Hulkenberg in the Drivers' Championship, back up to 10th, and Force India gets some valuable points in that battle for 6th. They're now 23 points ahead of Sauber, so very important points for Force India that week, this Indian Grand Prix. So very good home race for Force India. McLaren, and Jenson Button was just done by the beginning of the race. He had to change strategy very early on the prime tyres, pitted around think it was around that 10, and he put it onto the softs, and then he had to go back onto the primes, and then he had to put it again for the primes. So yeah, because he couldn't quite get those tyres to last the rest of the race, and so yeah, just not the race that Button wanted to have, and it was really undone by that collision with Alonso at the start. And he ends a very good point scoring run that he had from Germany up till then. So yeah, very disappointing for Button. Brilliant for Perez, probably his best race of the season, getting that 5th spot in India, equaling Button's 5th spot in China, as I said, for McLaren's best result of the season. It seems to almost wrap them up for 5th in the constructors as well, 25 points ahead of Force India. So maybe if they get a good result in Abu Dhabi, they can really sew up that 5th place in the constructors, but it's looking good for them at the moment. But yeah, Perez strategy, brilliant strategy for him. He made it work, and he's battling for a podium there in the end. Really, if he wasn't really held up behind Hamilton for most of that last stint, maybe if he got past them a bit earlier, he could have been challenging Massa and Grosjean. So yeah, Perez, he's very strong race, and he's been very up and down this season. I think we all know that. He's had conversation about his aggression, and his race pace has generally not been that bad compared to Button's. He's just been caught in spots where he's been stuck behind other cars, so the strategy doesn't really work out for him. But this time, it worked out perfectly for him, and you see what Perez can do if it does work out for him, getting that 5th spot. So well done to him. Ferrari and Felipe Massa, missed opportunity at a podium. They got Grosjean. They got hoodwinked by those there with Grosjean's strategy. I think everyone kind of knew Grosjean's strategy, but yeah, even then, Massa just could not quite get on the podium. There's a couple of seconds off, and this was his big chance to get it. Really big chance to get that final podium for Ferrari, in Ferrari colours, I mean. And there are rumours that he's going to Williams next year, joining Rob Smedley, who's still expected to join Williams next year. But he won't be his race engineer, probably. Smedley will probably be in a bit more of a senior position. But yeah, Massa, he was a good start. He was the lead in the race, and yeah, it just fed up after that. I think there was a bit of traffic issues, and I think he was stuck behind Gutierrez for a few laps. Gutierrez seemed to be the guy who was blocking quite a few guys for a few laps and messed up their strategies, and I think you hear that from quite a few drivers. But yeah, Massa just did not quite get on the podium. Missed opportunity there to get on the podium. And then we have Mercedes and Nico Rosberg in 2nd, Lewis Hamilton in 6th. Hamilton admitting he had a poor race, but he was just stuck behind anyone for the whole race, it seemed. He stuck behind Massa for most of the last part of the race. For most of the race, actually, he was stuck behind Massa. He was stuck behind Rosberg as well. He was stuck behind Massa for part of the race, and so yeah, he just didn't have the clean air to really make that strategy work. While Rosberg got past Massa eventually, and so he had the clear air. You could see what Rosberg did, finishing 2nd. So there's definitely the pace there in the Mercedes for Hamilton to get a podium. He just couldn't quite get the clear air and get those fast lap ins and really jump and really take advantage of his strategy. So yeah, disappointing for Hamilton there. But great race for Rosberg, getting 2nd and his first podium this year, which wasn't a win. His other 2 podiums have been the wins in Great Britain and Monaco, which is pretty strange, got to say. But yeah, great 2nd place, and now just 4 points behind Webber in the Drivers' Championship. So he's got a real chance again in that top 5 position, which I think he does deserve on the merits of this year. He has been very equal with Hamilton, perhaps more equal than some would think, but Hamilton was starting to kind of get on top of Rosberg, and it's been Rosberg over Hamilton, and it's been a very good battle between the two all year. And so yeah, good race very great race from Rosberg, especially as I said, he was kind of held up by Massa in parts of that race. So once he finally got the clear air, made some good moves, and they got past Raikkonen near the end of the race there quite easily in the end. Raikkonen making that one stopper not really working out. So yeah, great race from Rosberg. And Lotus, Raikkonen in 7th, and Grosjean in third. What a drive from Grosjean. He's on the crest of a wave at the moment. 3 third places in a row now after retirement in Singapore, where he's running really well and could have got a podium there if his car didn't fell on him even, not fall on him. That'd be painful. But yeah, he's jumped ahead of Massa up to 7th in the Drivers' Championship now, and he's taken a much different driver than he did for the first half of the year, where he did get that podium in Bahrain, but he's criticised for his race pace, for not being quite aggressive enough. He really toned down the aggression, maybe perhaps too much, but now he's found a good balance with the car and with how to manage the race, being aggressive when he has to be. Like he said, he dropped back in the early parts of the race but made some passes on those soft tyres, and he said the car really handled those tyres really well. Exceptional tyre management from Lotus, a bit reminiscent of the first part of the season. So yeah, great turnaround from Lotus as well on the tyres. We all thought they would lose out after the change of construction midway through the season, but they're coming on strong now. They're really challenging for that 4th spot in the constructors, and Mercedes getting their best points haul since Belgium with 26 points, but Lotus, they've got just less than them, and so they haven't lost too much ground to Mercedes, and so interesting battle for second going into the last 3 races of the season. Raikkonen, what can we say about Raikkonen? Well, he got the fastest lap on the last lap with 1:37.679. He was always stuck around that 5th spot, it seemed, or just lower in the first part of the race. He made his pit stop early on, and then tried to make it into a 1 stop when it wasn't really going to work out, it seemed. He kind of pitted too early after that first stint, and so yeah, it was. I'm not sure if it was a call from Raikkonen or the team, but it was a bad call either way, and he only got 7th when he probably could have got a top 5 if he just pitted. And yeah, it was a bad call from one of the people, and it was bad from Raikkonen, pushing his teammate off the road. And it's good that he's fighting, but from a team's perspective, Grosjean was managing an engine problem, using some pressure from the engine, and he had Massa closing in a bit when he was stuck behind Raikkonen. So Raikkonen maybe should have let Grosjean throughout that first part, not with defending so hard, but defend harder from Massa to really ensure that the team got the 3rd place there with Grosjean. In the end, it did work out, but yeah, it's another instance of Raikkonen and Lotus not being on the same page since that Ferrari move was announced, and there was shouting on the radio, and Lotus have apologised since then for that. And so yeah, for Raikkonen, yeah, it's a tricky end to the season. I think he's already kind of looking at Ferrari, but he's still got a good pace. For once, he out qualified Grosjean, which has been a feature, but again, Grosjean just managed his strategy better than Raikkonen, or Raikkonen just went onto the wrong strategy by trying to switch it from a 2-stop to a 1-stop there. So yeah, up and down for Lotus a bit there. And I forgot to talk about Fernando Alonso as well. In the 11th, yeah, held up for most of the race in that Ferrari, and making the early stop, and then just didn't have the setup or the straight line speed to get past cars in that DRS straight. And he really had to set up with KERS, but people were just defending with KERS in that DRS straight, and they could get the traction, get the run out the corners after that. And so he really had to work hard just to get up to 11th spot, Alonso, and that is just no clear air for him at all. Fighting all day, as I said, he was stuck behind Gutierrez and then stuck behind Ricciardo for the rest of the race. So yeah, dreadful race for Alonso and Ferrari there. But let's talk about the good race for Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull. 2-stop strategy. He was like Alonso, stuck down there, after pitting early, but his Red Bull has that straight line speed now. He was driving great, and the car was perhaps much better than anyone else in the race, as you saw with Oso Weber as well on his 2-stop strategy, but a different way of going around that 2-stop strategy with the softs in the middle of the race. But in the end, Vettel had enough pace to cover off that 2-stop strategy, which some thought was faster, the Weber strategy over the Vettel strategy, but yeah, Vettel, he just monstered through the cars, and then when he was in clear air, was doing the fastest laps. Like Webber was doing the fastest laps as well. But it was very close between the two. But in the end, Vettel just made enough when he had the clear air over Webber to get ahead of him. And unlucky for Webber, retiring on lap 39 and with an alternator failure. You haven't seen one of those much this year, have we? I think we saw it at Silverstone for Vettel, maybe. But yeah, it's a problem that you didn't really expect this year, and it's sad for Webber that he's retiring when he's guaranteed second spot virtually. That's how far ahead Red Bull were of the rest. But maybe it could have been interesting near the end with Vettel really having to manage those tyres, and with a slightly fresher tyres could have really gone after him maybe at the end there. But yeah, it was going to be a comfortable 1-2 for Red Bull either way, and 6th win in a row for Vettel. Next time out, if he wins in Abu Dhabi, equals the official record between Michael Schumacher and Alberto Ascari of 7 wins on the trot. Ascari did win 9 races on the trot they entered in, not 9, races in a row, because the Indy 500 used to be part of the World Championship in the early days, so he wasn't entered for that, even though he did the practice session, I believe. But yeah, Vettel, Red Bull, looking unbeatable at the moment. And I forgot to talk about Williams again. So also something that could have cost Maldonado at that point. There were problems with their wheel nuts, and so yeah, they had to be a bit safer on the start. It's costing them a second or two. So yeah, maybe that cost Maldonado a point as well. But yeah, Red Bull, Vettel's race and their championships. So that was the winners and losers of the Indy Grand Prix. Let's do of the race now. So, driver of the race, and there's a couple candidates. Of course, there's Vettel, who won the race, and Nico Rosberg behind him for second, get a very good podium in his Mercedes, and Roman Grosjean from 17th spot to grab third place. Perez for getting 5th in his McLaren, very strong, and then Force India drivers getting some solid points as well. But I think I'll have to share it between the guys who are on the podium, between Grosjean and Vettel. I've got to give it to Vettel because he was just supreme this race, and he really did underline how strong Red Bull were with their car. He's fast at 128.116 on those prime tyres with about 10 laps to go. Raikkonen beat that, of course, by half a second on the final lap with his fresh qualifying tyres, it seemed. But the nearest faster lap behind that is 3/10 from Sutil, who was actually on the soft tyres in that last stint. So his was on the soft tyres in that last stint with about 15 or 10 laps from the end as well. And so the other prime tyre runner, which you can really compare Vettel to near the end, is perhaps Perez, who did a 28.503. So he's 4/10 ahead of the McLaren on fastest lap. So it's just showing the gap that Red Bull have on the rest there on that race a bit there, with just comparing fastest laps. And then you look at the winning, by how much he won, by almost 30 seconds, the most ever in an Indian Grand Prix. And yeah, once again Vettel was supreme. Well, got to share it with Grosjean because of just the strategy. As I say, it's a brilliant race for strategy, with so many different alternatives out there. And Grosjean went with the one stop. The car handled the tyres well, he managed the tyres well, and he also had the pace. He brought it out when he needed to. It was actually surprising seeing him do faster laps in 20 laps into a stint. He was really doing well on those tyres, and he made the moves when he needed to, even if his teammate wasn't quite reluctant to him getting past. But yeah, Grosjean, I had to share it between him and Vettel because they were both brilliantly managed races, but in different ways. And so yeah, I had to share it between the two. Team of the race, and I would give it to Red Bull, but they did have a failure on the car, and I have this, it's the unofficial kind of rule for team of the race that you have to have both cars finishing the race. I would give it to Lotus, but I do believe they messed up Raikkonen's strategy, so I'm going to actually give it to Force India in their home race for getting the doubles points finishes for the first time in quite a long time, actually since that British Grand Prix, so over 8 races ago. And getting out of that home race, 8th and 9th, getting an important stage in the season with Sauber closing in on 6th, and really doing in front of the home crowd as well. And so yeah, I've got to give Team of the Race to Force India for getting 8th and 9th with 2 very different strategies. DRS, I think it was with the 2-stop, and Sutil with the 1-stop, the alternate 1-stop to Grosjean, going long on those prime tyres and then managing those softs. He really did manage those softs. I remember he dropped quite a way back from the rest, but he really closed that gap up in the last few laps, and he was only a couple of seconds behind his teammate in the end. So, I've got to give it to Force India for getting that double points finish for the first time in a long time, and at such a crucial stage in the season as well, especially with Sauber getting no points as well for the first time in a few races. Overtake of the race, and I have to be honest, I don't really classify DRS or Kerr's overtakes as kind of overtakes. Their passes. There's a different definition for me to overtake and pass, and I didn't see any overtakes really. It was mostly done on that first corner, and yeah, that's a bit of a shame. But I'll perhaps give this is the only time I'll perhaps do this. Give it to a DRS pass. Well, I can't say it's overtake. So pass of the race goes to Sergio Perez for taking Raikkonen and Hamilton on that back straight for a couple of laps to go. I'm not giving it for him just getting past him for the DRS pass. It's the way he set it up by seeing where Hamilton's going and then again seeing Hamilton was trapped behind Raikkonen there and then going for the gap on the outside, just placing the car, really managing how to use that DRS and get that pass. So I have to give it to Perez, and he's known for being very aggressive, but sometimes he does use his head. He really did lose his head on that DRS pass there. So I got to give it to Perez for pass of the race. So yeah, that was very different winners therefore of the races there. But I hope you enjoyed this review of the Indian Grand Prix. It's always a bum version of the show. It will be for a couple of weeks. The house is getting painted. So yeah, there's loads of crap everywhere. It's a bit like a hoarder's house at the moment, unfortunately. So yeah, you're going to see another bum version of a preview of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, or Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi. And so yeah, the colourful hotel is back, and also Ferrari World, which is always nice to see in the pre-race coverage. So yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this review of the Indian Grand Prix, and as I said, I'll be back with a preview of the next F1 race, and of course I'm going to do a review of Fontana as well at the weekend. It's taken a couple of weeks to digest that race. Within the first week, if I reviewed that, I would just be like mouth on the jaw, just rambling about how brilliant it was. Yeah, but in the second week, I kind of had to analyse how tragedies played out, how such as Ganassi really came strong in that second half of the race. So yeah, I really got to look at that race again before I review it at the weekend. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. So till next time, cheerio.